During this course, I have already explained some thought experiments used in philosophy. There are more of them, and here I will introduce some of the most famous ones that you should know about. Plato's allegory of the cave is the most important and most well-known of all philosophical thought experiments. Plato asks you to imagine a cave where some prisoners are being held chained to a low wall so that they are facing the back of the cave. They have been held here all their lives. If that is too difficult for you to accept, you can alter the story by assuming that they all suffer from severe amnesia. They have regained consciousness in the cave with no memories of anything prior to their awakening. The point is, all these people know about the world is what they can see at the back of the cave. They can only face the back wall, although they can talk to each other. What the prisoners see in the back wall is light coming from the fire behind the prisoners and the wall, and shadows cast by various objects being carried by other people behind the wall the prisoners are chained to. The prisoners do not understand that what they are observing are merely shadows of the objects, instead mistaking them for the objects themselves. The effect is the same as in shadow play, where puppets are used to create shadows on a screen visible to the audience. Now, one of the prisoners is freed and brought over the wall he had been chained to. The fire there is too bright for his eyes and makes it difficult for him to see anything there. Even though he is told that the things he is now seeing are the reality, he doesn't believe it because the light hurts his eyes and he can't see well. Thus, he will gladly return to stare at the wall where he can easily see the images. But instead of allowing this escape from reality, the prisoner is forced completely out of the cave into sunlight. That is much worse for him, but eventually he will adjust to his new surroundings, even finally being able to look at the sun itself. Because he now understands what reality is actually like, and how limited his earlier understanding of reality was while chained to the wall, he wants to go back and help the other prisoners. But upon returning to the cave, the freed man is not able to see in the dark. He tries to explain to the other prisoners how much better it was outside, but the others only see how harmful it had been, making their friend blind. So they do not want to share his fate, and if anyone tries to force them out of the cave as well, they will rather kill the person trying to do that than let themselves be brought to light. This is the allegory of the cave, but what does it mean? I have previously explained Plato's epistemology and metaphysics. His view is known as idealism because he thought that reality was fundamentally based on unchanging, eternal, and perfect ideas. What we observe with our senses is not the true reality, but only the changing world of sensations or phenomena that imperfectly reflect the real ideas. We cannot observe the ideas with senses, but only through our ability to reason. It seems clear to me that the shadows on the wall represent the phenomena, while the objects being carried represent the ideas. The surface world outside the cave represents the world of ideas, and the trip outside represents the ability to use reason. Plato's teacher, Socrates, had been sentenced to death for impiety and corrupting the young. He had been practicing philosophy, questioning everything, and making fools of some important people in the process. He doesn't seem to have agreed with the religious views of the other Athenians, and was too much of an annoying gadfly to be allowed to live. So he was commanded to drink poison. He actually could have escaped, as it would have resulted in exile, which was generally considered as bad as death, and so was in effect allowed. But apparently Socrates believed in law and the ideal of Athenian democracy, and so he drank the poison. Of course, he was also an old man at this point. Whatever the real motivations of his accusers, or of Socrates himself for choosing the poison, it seems to me that in the allegory of the cave, the escaped prisoner trying to save the others is an allegory for Socrates. The common people would rather kill to be able to live in a lie than accept the truth. There is something similar to this also in the movie The Matrix. Another famous metaphysical thought experiment involves the mythical seafarer Theseus. In his long voyages, his ship was often damaged and had to be repaired, with old wooden planks replaced by new ones. The question this immediately brings up is about change. Since much of the ship, and eventually all of it, is replaced by new parts, is the ship even the same ship anymore? Or in what sense is it the same, or what makes it the same ship? Now imagine that all the old parts got stored instead of just being thrown away. Nothing should be just thrown away if they can be used in some way. What if all the old parts got fixed with superglue or something and got put back together by a master ship builder? Then there would be two ships. The fixed ship, original in the sense that it is the one Theseus has been using all this time, and this other ship that was made of all the original parts of Theseus's ship. Which is the real Theseus's ship, or are there now two of them? Or is neither the real one? If this seems like pointless speculation, then think about yourself. Surely you are aware that you also change over time. As a young child, you were very different from what you are now, and even if you haven't grown in size over the recent years, or possibly decades, you still know that you have changed physically. You have hopefully also changed mentally. The cells in your body apparently get replaced in about 7 years or so. Your opinions and beliefs also change. This realization inspired me to write about 25 years ago that I am not who I was and will not be who I am. But in some sense, I am still the same person who wrote that, am I not? Similar to the ship of Theseus is the idea of teleportation. I have used this notion in discussions over the past 2 decades, and so have probably others, but it is not exactly an old famous thought experiment. I still want to add it here because scientists have suggested that teleportation is possible in principle, in a limited sense. The idea has famously been used especially in Star Trek. A thing or a person is teleported in the sense that the teleportation machine analyzes, literally breaks up the thing, storing data about all the particles making up the whole thing being teleported. Then the information is sent to another place, where a machine fabricates the object or person from synthesized particles according to the data sent to it. This other machine could be vast distances or time away from the first machine. The whole process is, of course, supposed to be pretty instantaneous and painless. The question I've liked to pose my students and others is, would you step into a teleportation machine like this? I found it surprising how many people answer that they would. They reason that because the fabricated body would be an exact copy of the original, with all particles, cells and so forth exactly like in the original, and the rebuilt body would have all the same memories as the original and so on, it would be the same person. Certainly, you couldn't see any differences between the original and the copy. But to me, the word copy already points out the problem. It is a copy and not the original. The original gets destroyed. I wouldn't want to be destroyed, and I would not find it consoling to know that an exact copy of me will go on. If you still don't see the problem, then how about this? Once the data from the analysis has been stored, there is no reason it could only be used once. Instead of making just one copy, what if they make 24 copies of your original body? They could keep making these copies in different places and at different times. Would all these copies be you? Or how about this? Let's assume that the analysis in the teleportation machine doesn't actually require the destruction of the original body. A replica of it could still be created. The only thing that changed in this version was that the original was not destroyed. So does that change something? Would you allow the original now to be shot, since it was copied? Or does that change your intuition of the situation? The result would be the same as in the original teleport version. The original is dead and the copy lives. So, what do you think about teleportation? Would you step into the teleportation machine, knowing what you now know? Let me know in the comments below. The Chinese Room is a thought experiment by John Searle, published in 1980. It is an argument against the idea that a computer could really understand anything. This is not about any artificial intelligence, but specifically one that functions like a computer, that has a central processing unit and an algorithmic program running it. The computer can be given inputs and it can produce outputs that pass the Turing test. The test bearing Alan Turing's name is one where a person, the evaluator, is given the opportunity to communicate with other people and a machine. And the idea is that if the evaluator cannot tell which is the machine and which are humans, the machine passes the test. The point is that once an AI reaches the level where it cannot be distinguished from humans, we can no longer claim that it has no consciousness. This is perhaps an oversimplification, but that is the basic point of the test. The Chinese Room is similar to the Turing test, in that an evaluator sends written messages into the room. It doesn't really matter how exactly that happens, but the point is that the messages sent are in Chinese. And there is a person, let's call him JR, inside the room, who does not know any Chinese. JR receives messages in Chinese which he does not understand. In the room there is a book with instructions in English that he does understand. These instructions do not translate the Chinese messages he receives, but instead tell him which Chinese symbols to write in response. Now, we are expected to imagine that the evaluator outside the room is soon convinced that they are communicating with a person inside the Chinese room. So the room passes the Turing test. And you might agree that they have been communicating with a person inside the room, because JR was there, receiving and sending messages in Chinese. But the point is that JR does not understand any Chinese. He is simply following the instructions in the book. This thought experiment is supposed to show that even if it passes the Turing test, the computer does not actually understand anything, because it is simply following instructions, just like JR in the Chinese room. The way I see it is that you make a mistake if you think the evaluator was communicating with JR. The person being communicated with, if any, is in the strange book instructing JR or in the process involving the book. Nobody claimed that the AI was in the processor of the computer either, just more generally in the computer. JR is just the processor in the thought experiment, but if the instructions really enabled the Chinese room to pass the Turing test, it would seem that we should look for the mind in the instructions, and certainly not in the person simply obeying those instructions. But this is just my opinion. You may wish to look into this discussion yourself. It would be one way to familiarize yourself with the branch of philosophy known as the philosophy of mind. Some thought experiments have to do with ethics. One of them is called Heinz's dilemma because the main character of the story is called Heinz. His wife is gravely ill and there is only one cure for her. It is an expensive drug developed by someone in the same town. That is lucky because there's very little time left for the wife. What is unlucky is that although it didn't cost him that much to develop the drug, the developer is asking for a much higher price for the drug, since he wants to profit from his work. Heinz is able to loan and put together only half of the price of the drug, and asks for a discount explaining the circumstances. Still, no discount is given, so he asks to be permitted to pay the rest of the money afterwards. But that is also denied. It is now obvious that there is no legal way for Heinz to get the drug to save his wife. Instead, it is possible for him to steal the drug. The purpose of this dilemma is to force you to think about the situation and how to resolve it. The thought experiment has been used to study ethical thinking, assessing people on Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development. According to that theory, people develop through various stages from pre-conventional through conventional to post-conventional stages. Not all ever reach the highest stages. The form of the answer one gives to the dilemma reveals one's stage of moral development. This subject will be covered in more detail during the courses for developmental psychology and social psychology. For now, you can think of how different ethical theories would lead you to solve the dilemma. Another famous ethical thought experiment is the trolley problem, which has inspired many funny memes. The original point of the thought experiment wasn't to make a joke, though. It was an ethical dilemma about choice. Imagine that you see a runaway trolley heading toward a group of people working on the tracks, unaware of the danger. You have no way of alerting them, but notice a track switch close by. If you use it, the path of the trolley will change and it will go down another track. As you grab the switch lever, you notice that there is one person on that track as well. Do you pull the lever, condemning one person to death, or do you let the trolley run over a group of about 5 people by doing nothing? This may sound like a ridiculous dilemma, and if you want, you can easily find a lot of completely ludicrous versions of this problem. But you may also realize that the basic point, the real problem, is not really ridiculous. It is a real problem some people have to deal with in real life. For example, airplane pilots may find themselves in a situation where they have to crash land their plane in a populated area. It seems pretty obvious that, if possible, they should choose a place where the number of people likely to be killed is smallest. The problem is also relevant to people designing autonomous vehicles. A self-driving car may find itself in a situation where it cannot avoid a collision, but it might be able to still make some choices about the collision, such as what exactly to collide with. The car itself is just an automated machine and cannot be held responsible, but the designers of the AI in the car might be, unless they make sure that the car will make the right choice in such a situation. This car example, of course, opens up other questions, ethical and otherwise, but let's ignore them for now. Focusing on the trolley problem, it's not just about the number of people being killed. 5 people is generally speaking worse than 1. But there is also the difference between taking action and just passively allowing something bad to happen. Are they equal, ethically speaking? In other versions of the problem, the way to make the choice is changed so that in order to stop the trolley, you have to physically push a fat man off a bridge so that by falling on the tracks, their body stops the trolley. Ignoring how unlikely that scenario is, for some reason, a lot of people find that to be unacceptable, while they consider pulling the lever and thus causing one person's death the right thing to do. Somehow, the imagined distance between the cause and the effect seems to influence their judgment of the situation. That may have little to do with what is actually the right thing to do, but it is important to realize that we have confusing emotional reactions to different ethical scenarios. Temporal paradoxes may be familiar to you if you have read popular science books, especially about Einstein's theory of relativity. That is because there are theoretical reasons to think that time travel might actually be possible, because of the nature of time as Einstein understood it. His theory has a very strong evidential support, as for example the GPS relies on it. The possibility of time travel apparently follows from the same theory, so it would seem that it should be possible. But the temporal paradoxes, that is, contradictions arising from messing with time, cast doubt on it. In the twin paradox story about identical twins, one of them stays on Earth while the other takes a trip on a spaceship. The ship travels close to the speed of light. Upon returning to Earth, decades have passed on Earth, but for the spaceman, only perhaps a year. The twins are now at different ages, which is weird because they are twins, having been born at the same time. But this does not seem like much of a problem for most people these days, because we now accept that time just is a bit weird like that. You've probably seen several movies that use this idea, such as Interstellar, and have no trouble accepting this. That's a thunderstorm outside. The point of the time paradox, at least as I see it, is made more obvious by perhaps the most popular version of such paradoxes, the grandfather paradox. In this story, you go back in time to kill your grandfather before he has any children. But since he dies before having any children, you will never be born. But if you aren't born, you can't go back in time to kill your grandfather. But then he won't die, and he will have children, and you will be born, and you can go back in time. This is clearly a paradox. It doesn't seem to make any sense. The point is not to focus on the silly story about you and your grandfather. You could simplify the story, but you shouldn't get caught up in thinking about human things. The real problem is that time travel seems to imply potential paradoxes. Even just things in an atomic scale that you wouldn't notice. But if there are temporal paradoxes, what does that mean? Since it seems impossible from the point of view of logic, does that mean they cannot exist? Since any time travel implies paradoxes, does that mean time travel itself cannot be possible? In other words, does logic trump physics? Or is it the other way around? If time travel is possible to some extent, then does that mean logic is just a fallible human construct? One attempt to explain the paradox away is to suggest that there are many worlds, so that all possibilities are in fact actual, just in separate worlds. This means there are different timelines, and going back in time, you would actually go into a different timeline. This, to me at least, seems even less likely than the basic grandfather paradox, because I find the whole many worlds interpretation to be so implausible. If I have understood it correctly, every single possible change in the state of a particle would result in the splitting of the timeline, the creation of a new world for each possible state of that one tiny particle. It seems to me that such things appearing, creating whole new realities out of nothing, with no energy expenditure even, seems extremely implausible. Occam's razor recommends not favoring such an interpretation, as it requires what seems like infinities of entities unnecessary to explain observable reality. But of course, I could be wrong. That's all the thought experiments I wanted to cover for now. What do you think about them? Did you already know all of them, or was there something new you learned here? Let me know in the comments below. Next time I will talk about modern philosophy. If you want to be notified when it gets published, you need to turn on the notifications by clicking the bell. That's all for now. Bye! If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.